everyone, welcome back in. It's another episode of the Wobcast 2.0. Yours truly, Wobby and Gyles, coming back to you to talk Minnesota Vikings. It's been a minute since we've gotten together to chat, so we've got a lot of stuff to get through. The main topic today, everyone, and we're excited to do it, is we want to break down the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year prospects among some of the rookies in this year's class, including our very own JJ McCarthy. See where he fits into the race for that very popular annual award that the NFL hands out. Can JJ McCarthy win it? So Gyles and I are going to break that down and talk about that in a little bit. We're going to hit some other news, notes, and nuggets first across the National Football League and the Minnesota Vikings. So excited to do all of that with you. My partner Gyles is here to help me along. Let's bring him in now. Hey, partner, how we doing?
Hey, happy Friday. I will say it's a little rainy here today. Got a little bit of a cloud storm over us after the Wolves lost last night, unfortunately. But from what I'm hearing out of the Egan facility, JJ McCarthy is maybe about to lift the clouds here. It's about to be a new day in the Minnesota sports category, so I'm excited for it.
I agree with that, Gyles. I'm seeing a lot of, whether it's from beat writers, obviously the team does a good job of posting highlights, but I'm even seeing some of the beat writers with not saying much about Sam Darnold, but they're saying a lot of good things about JJ McCarthy. So like the hype is not over the top, but there's some good press about the quarterback out of TCO Performance Center. So, it's just really interesting for me to monitor sort of the public feeling on should McCarthy start or should Darnold start, and to just sort of chart that almost like the stock market. How that goes up and down. And right now, I think that stock is rising. And I think there are times during the course of the offseason where Darnold's stock will naturally rise. And mandatory minicamp could be one of those times. But right now, it's trending like I think people are going to want McCarthy to start,
Yeah, 100%. And I think when you explore the progression of a rookie quarterback, I think sometimes people oversimplify it because some people look at a rookie quarterback, and let's just use JJ McCarthy in this context, progressing this forward. They would say, well, he either did or he did not get as many snaps as I wanted to, or they wanted them to in training camp. And I think it's far more contextual than this. I think training camp is specifically for all players, but especially for the quarterback, meant to install scheme. You are trying to install scheme and get your plays corrected so then when it comes week one, you are ready to execute that scheme. So it is learning scheme. And to be very clear, since it's focused on learning scheme, it's inherently not meant to fix mechanics, right? If they have to pause plays and say, nope, shift your footwork here, let's change your mechanics there, that ruins it for every other player that's trying to learn the scheme, right? So that's where I think this becomes really difficult for a rookie quarterback. And the part that gives me such excitement and such intrigue is that JJ McCarthy, among a lot of different other attributes, is highly prepared. I mean, we've been hearing word that he's been one of the first people in the building, one of the last people out. He showed up to rookie minicamp fully conditioned. He was like, I was ready 2 weeks ago. I don't need to get up to speed. I'm up to speed now. And he's been someone that has been taking very good critique on fixing his fundamentals, fixing his mechanics. Now, does that mean he'll be ready for training camp and be QB1? I'm not saying that. But if you are trying to build a recipe or a formula to do that, he is on all the right steps. If he can fix the mechanics and the slight ones that Kevin O'Connell wants him to fix, that becomes very intriguing. So if he does fix those, by the time we get to official training camp, there's a chance that he's ready to go to actually install scheme. That could be very intriguing. That's how you're able to imitate more of a CJ Stroud, in my opinion, because then you can actually spend time doing what you're supposed to be during each of those different times. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. Yep, I follow you on that. And I left before O'Connell got there, so I don't know him or his staff in the way I knew previous staffs. But I can say, from a general standpoint, Gyles, coaches, They are obsessed with can you like Brad Childress would always say, make the routine plays routinely, right? Like your baseline, you want the baseline to be as broad and as steady as possible. And once that happens, now coaches are going to be more willing and able to work with you and put you in, right? So to your point, if that is where McCarthy is and he goes into training camp and plays, and then eventually plays his first preseason game, and they're not fixing a bunch of rudimentary things, it's only going to increase the chance that O'Connell can be nudged to play McCarthy instead of Darnold earlier, maybe as soon as week one. So anyway, cart before the horse there, but I think your point's a good one. And if you're not having to fix some of those basics and fundamentals, once you get past that stage, that's just more scheme that you can implement, more strategy you can work on, more synthesis that's happening with some of the other starters. So I think it's all good news coming out of TCO Performance Center for McCarthy, and that doesn't always happen with rookie quarterbacks. So it's good. Mm-hmm. And speaking of synthesizing with starters, Dalton Reisner, Gyles, you're our resident offensive line guy. We've talked about Reisner probably going to end up back. I don't think he's unlike any of the rest of us. He has a self-ascribed value. He was probably looking for more money than the Vikings were offering him, and he was probably looking for a multi-year deal. So he didn't get that for whatever reason, and the Vikings probably had a good idea what the market was for him and waited to sign him and waited and waited and waited. Didn't even get him in the first couple of waves of free agency. Didn't even do it before the draft. The draft happens. You get a few OTAs. You kind of figure like, I do kind of think we need him. So it kind of worked out in great favor for the Vikings, but also good for Reisner because he's not going to a new team, learning a new scheme, learning a new offensive line coach, right? So, I saw this news earlier in the week, and I just was like, I'm not surprised about that, but it's still good. It's still good news for in my viewpoint anyway, because I look at that offensive line and I can't say it's like a huge uber weakness, but I also don't love it. And Reisner being there helps a little bit more. Do you follow me on that? Yeah.
I completely follow you. And we've obviously talked at length about Reisner's strengths and shortcomings. He is a pretty phenomenal pass protector. I would say he's an effective pass protector, not an efficient one. It takes a lot for him to be able to do it. And I think when you think about the offensive line as a full unit, it takes everyone to make sure that he is effective. But at the end of the day, he's effective. And that's what you're asking for. It'd be great if he could also be efficient, but I would much rather be effective first and then efficient than be efficient and not effective.
Exactly.
Right. So I think that's incredibly important. Gave up 0 sacks. That's an important stat. It is the stat, right? His deficiencies obviously come in the run game. We've explored that at length when it comes to average yards per rush attempt when running through the left tackle and the left guard when he was in play. Not great. So I do think a couple things can be true. One, Aaron Jones brings an elevation to the running back room that makes that a little less important. Still important, but a little less important. However, I think the really intriguing part here is the presence of Blake Brandel, because I've heard rumor that people are in love with him inside the building. Now, we'll see if that's true or not, but there could be a scenario here where they plan on letting this be a camp competition where Brandel, we like you. We think you have the opportunity to steal a left guard position. We have Dalton Reisner. He's done that. He's been there. He's a great pass protector. He is a league above average guard, right? Is he elite? No, but he is at least above average, right? Yeah. I like that. But if you can take it, go for it. Because if the Minnesota Vikings, and this is a big if, but if the Minnesota Vikings can have a training camp competition and Brandel proves himself to be a better guard on the left side on both run and pass, you have now elevated yourself into a great position as a team, because Dalton Reisner would then be maybe the best backup left guard there is in the league. I mean, being completely serious, right? Yeah, if you can prove that Brandel is better, if we go into week 1 and Brandel is starting, that is an indication that they think he is an all-star at that position. Yes. Do you agree? I think that's a really interesting thing.
Yes, I would agree with that. You're right. It's like, it reminds me, this is a more bombastic example, but it kind of illustrates the point. When the Seattle Seahawks spent a crap ton of money and signed Matt Flynn away from the Green Bay Packers, and then they wound up starting Russell Wilson instead, right? So it's like, so the one way to look at that is like, oh, really? You spent, I can't remember what the contract was, but you spent $12 million on Matt Flynn and a 3rd-round pick beat him out? Like you can look at it critically, like what are you doing? On the flip side, it's like, Well, yeah, but this 3rd round pick's amazing. It's Russell Wilson who's going to win a Super Bowl for us, right? So, that Brandell Reisner thing is like that, just on a smaller scale. So if week 1 comes along and Brandell is starting, I look at that as like, wow, he must be playing really well. I don't look at that like, geez, Reisner wasn't as good as we thought, because they know what Reisner is. If they didn't like him, they wouldn't have brought him back. They didn't have to bring him back. So, and who knows, maybe they both find their way into the starting lineup if you don't like what's happening at right guard too, right? So, and then the other thing too is, it just, having Reisner there is a little bit of like a fallback plan, where it's like, now the rookies that you drafted, Rouse as an example, it's just a little less pressure to like hurry up and get ready and play. Because now it's like, you didn't quite get there, you're not quite ready, and that's okay. You're going to keep you on the roster, you're going to learn and practice, put you on the scout team, watch, sit in film room with Reisner and all these, and Bradbury, and learn. So it's just a little less pressure on some of the Juergens and Rouse to get into the lineup sooner.
Yep. And at the end of the day, the Minnesota Vikings, and I guess even the greater NFL, is in the business of calculated risk, right? When you're drafting a player, that is a calculated risk that you're taking. When you're taking somebody 2nd overall or 10th overall in JJ McCarthy, it's in theory a little less of a calculated risk if you believe them to be a sure thing, but it is still inherently a calculated risk. And when you look at the overall formula to go chase a championship, at least it's my prerogative that's beyond having a great quarterback to win a Super Bowl, one of the next best important requirements to win a Super Bowl, or at least get to the dance, is having a good offensive line. And that not only means your starting 5, it means your depth as well, because it's a long season. It's a brutal sport, especially when you're in the trenches, and you cannot afford to have a crappy backup starting in a Super Bowl. We've seen what that's looked like in years past. A crappy backup offensive line loses you a Lombardi trophy, period.
Definitely.
So if you're Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, I actually commend something like this. We're making a calculated risk. We think Brandell's going to be good, but there's a chance he could not be, right? You need to manage the upside, but also protect the downside. I am absolutely okay overspending when it comes to offensive line, because that's a one position that I do not want to be without. I think you can get by in other categories. If you have an injury, do you want it? Absolutely not. But if you have an injury at offensive line, that can train wreck your position, in my opinion.
It can. And a big reason for that is because of the requirement that those 5 guys are operating as one unit, right? I mean, I'm watching a documentary right now on the Blue Angels, and they talk about how it's 6 pilots flying 6 different airplanes, but they got to fly as one, right? And the offensive line is the same. So when you get an injury, especially to one of the better players, that's a big problem. And plus then it's like, sometimes your best option to replace that injured right guard, let's say, is with the starting left guard. So are you going to disrupt the starting left guard spot to fix the right guard spot and then deal with the backups over there? So it just is like a big, nasty jigsaw puzzle that's hard to solve when you get injuries. Let's last thing before we go rookie of the year conversation. Justin Jefferson. There's just weird little bubbles or pockets that pop up of anxiety from the fan base about the Jefferson extension during this offseason. Right now, we're in one of those little periods where it's like it's peaking. Like, people are talking and getting worried about it because Jalen Waddle got paid. Some of these other receivers are getting paid. And I'm just steady Eddie on this whole thing. I think it's going to I even think I know the day it's going to happen. I think it's going to be August 1st, right before training, like padded practices start. Like, I have no anxiety about this at all. Do you share that sentiment, or are you sort of on the other side where you're kind of chomping at the bit? Like, are we going to get this done or not, guys?
I completely agree. I also am in the firm position that it'll get done. In fact, I'm actually of the firm belief that they already have an agreement in place. Whether it's signed or not are details, but I think they have agreement in place. And I think there's actually a chance that that's we'll call it a malleable in agreement, not in the idea that it's going to get done or not going to get done. But I think Justin Jefferson's top priority, clearly, it's his clear priority that he wants to be the highest paid non-quarterback, right?
Right.
And
right.
If he signs it today and then someone else comes out 2 weeks later and signs it, no longer is he that guy. So I think even the Vikings' willingness to kind of concede to his request, it makes sense to wait until August, right? Let's wait for the rest of these to get signed because we want to make sure that you're happy. We're in agreement that we're willing to pay up to X. Assuming that doesn't happen, or here's where it's going to be. If it doesn't happen, here's where it's going to be. I think that agreement's probably already in place. But at the end of the day, I think the deal gets done, and I think the deal gets done before the training camp. I agree, and I think the rumors that the Vikings were trying to trade up to get Malik Neighbors, I think those all have been negated. So I think anyone that's speculating on the Vikings actually wanting to get Justin Jefferson, those have been clearly thrown out of the building. So I don't think Vikings fans need to be concerned in the slightest.
Yep, I agree. All right, so let's talk Offensive Rookie of the Year and the prospects for JJ McCarthy to get there and the main competition. All right, Gyles, you and I sort of we've connected on this in that we knew we were going to talk about it and make it the subject of an episode, but we didn't connect on it where we synced up how we prepped. So I think we probably prepared for this conversation in our own different ways. I'll sort of set the foundation, or at least the way I looked at it. I just took a look at the more recent Offensive Rookies of the Year. What's the profile? What were the situations? 8 of the last 10 Gyles were first rounders. So 80% of the time in the last decade, the Offensive Rookie of the Year was a first round pick. Not a surprise, but an important note, because I really wanted to assess the competition here for McCarthy. Mm-hmm. And so with that in mind, I'm like, I'm not going to look outside the first round. So I stuck with first round picks. The only non-first rounders to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year award in the last decade were Alvin Kamara, who's obviously a running back. He won Rookie of the Year in 2017. And then in 2016, it was Dak Prescott, who was a fourth-round pick. So other than that, we're dealing with first-round picks. Here's the other interesting thing about Offensive Rookie of the Year. A quarterback has won Offensive Rookie of the Year, Gyles, in 3 of the last 5 seasons. However, only 4 times has it been a quarterback going back to 2014. I thought that was interesting. You got guys like Garrett Wilson, Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, Odell Beckham Jr. So that made me a little more interested in assessing the chances of it being Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors or Brock Bowers. And when a quarterback didn't win Rookie of the Year, I looked at why was that? What happened that year? Was it a weak quarterback class? Was it a super strong class in other areas? And I think it's interesting that the number of players drafted who are skill position players in the first round, okay? Mm-hmm. On average, since 2009, from 2019 to 2023, on average, wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, quarterbacks, 9.4 of those went in the first round on average, 9.4. Okay. This year, there were 14. So the field is bigger this year for JJ McCarthy to defeat, is basically what I'm saying. So okay. I want to be optimistic about McCarthy's chances to be Offensive Rookie of the Year. But I think there are some things that are inherently difficult for him to get over this year, and that is the total population of eligible candidates is big. It's 14 this year. Yep. You know, not to totally discount second round and beyond, but it's 14 first round skill position players were drafted, and it's usually about 9.5. So this year it's 14. And I actually think another problem is some of those guys are like really damn good, like Marvin Harrison Jr. And like Marvin Harrison Jr. could win it, and he was picked in the top 5, which means you might go to a bad team, but he's got Kyler Murray as his quarterback, which we could debate how good Kyler Murray is, but he's not an embarrassment, right? Yeah. So he's going to get the ball thrown to him. So that's kind of a long introduction, but and now we can kind of go back and forth on what we think will happen, but that's how I sort of laid out the landscape in my mind. This year is, relatively speaking, it's a hard year to win Offensive Rookie of the Year this year. And I think the fact that the first overall pick being Caleb Williams and he's going into a really good situation doesn't make it any easier. So it's a hard year because non-quarterbacks are good and in a good spot. Plus, the main quarterback is in also a really good spot. With Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, Gerald Everett, just a good system in Chicago.
I really like that breakdown because you make that really interesting. Because I took a different approach when exploring the offensive rookie of the year, but now you're making me kind of reevaluate my framework. That doesn't make it one way or the other.
Don't do that.
Just factoring.
Yeah, your framework's good.
No, I'm kidding. I mean, although I inherently agree with every point that you said, I do think those things definitely need to be factored in. If we're going to view it through my framework in a vacuum, I made the assumption, which, what they say about assumptions, but I made the assumption that the offensive rookie of the year would be a quarterback, because unless there is a standout performance from someone like Marvin Harrison Jr., if it's anywhere close, it'll always go on the quarterback. That's usually my gut reaction, right? So when you think about the quarterbacks that will be playing in this year, more than likely that's a Caleb Williams, that is a Drake May, that is a Bo Nix. More than likely. I don't think Michael Penix Jr. plays, and obviously we want JJ McCarthy to play. It's just the timing on what that will look like. So between those, you have a relatively small sample size, and I'm not in love with what the Broncos have on the field right now. They've kind of destroyed their roster, so I'm going to put Nix out of the conversation for a second. You can argue me on that, but for the sake of this conversation, we'll throw it out. And I think May is probably not in a good position for the Patriots. There's a chance that they have the number 1 overall pick next year. Jaden Daniels, I think, is really interesting from the Commanders, but we'll leave him out of this conversation for the second. I'm going to compare this between Caleb Williams and JJ McCarthy. Let's say when you look at both of those players, not only do I want to evaluate this from their performance in the historical, I want to look at this from infrastructure around them, right? Because it's a team game, whether you like it or not. Quarterbacks do have to rely on other facets of the game, both on the people they have around them on that side of the ball, but also the defense, right? And when you're exploring the performance of their infrastructure on both sides, it's really quite intriguing. Because when you look at Williams, I wouldn't say I'm in love with his offensive line, but I've definitely seen worse. Starting from left to right guard, you have Braxton Jones at left tackle. Last year, he had a 68.8 grade. You have Tevin Jenkins at the left guard, former Bear, former first-round pick. He had a 72.6 grade. I think there's a little bit of a concern with some of the off-the-field things with him. But ultimately, at center, you have Ryan Bates at 78.7. And then you have Nate Davis at right guard with a 52.9 grade. And then Darnell Wright, a 62.4 grade on the right tackle position. So both for left and right tackle, you don't have great performance, honestly. It's not train wreck performance. You could maybe make that argument on the right tackle side, but tackles are not perfect. You have a good left guard in Tevin Jenkins, and you're having a pretty good performance at the center position. But when you come to your offensive line, the average there is a 67.0 grade PFF-wise across the board for offensive line. When you contrast that to JJ McCarthy, we have Christian Darrisaw at left tackle, who had a down year, honestly, with injury, and still came out with an 82.4 grade. You have either Blake Brandell or Dalton Reisner at left guard, and those guys are in the 60s, we'll call it, from a PFF grade standpoint. Garrett Bradbury also had a down year. He had a 60 grade at center. Ed Ingram had a better year in year 3 with a 59.5 grade. I hope that he'll take a step forward. And then Brian O'Neill, who also had a little bit of a down year with injury, had a 74.5 grade. I would make a pretty strong argument that we have the best left tackle unit in the NFL. And I think that's important when you're putting in a rookie quarterback, right? Both Caleb Williams and JJ McCarthy are rookie quarterbacks, and having 2 elite tackles is a great way to put them into a great position. So at the end of the day, that brings our, I lost the number, but I believe that brought our offensive line average to like 70. Okay. But at the end of the day, I think we have a better offensive line position than Caleb Williams. Both Caleb Williams and JJ McCarthy are mobile. So when you think about any deficiency that either of those offensive lines have, both of the players could get out of the pocket. I do think JJ McCarthy has a little bit more poise when it comes to what's required when being mobile. But that's a personal opinion. But that's the offensive line side. When you think about infrastructure, I think we have a better offensive line infrastructure than the Bears. So when you're doing that, it's points to McCarthy. Then when you look at the weapons, obviously in the Bears, for wide receiver 1, at least until proven otherwise, is DJ Moore. He had an 89.3 grade last year. At wide receiver 2, I'm guessing that will be Rome Odunze. Now, if you were to take the average of the top 4 receivers taken last year in the first round, which is a little bit of a speculation. You tell me if you don't like that framework. But if you take the average PFF grade for the top 4 receivers taken last year, we could project that Rome Odunze will have a 66.77 PFF grade, which is not great. It's not a train wreck. I'm a big fan of Rome Odunze. I hope he does better. As a Vikings fan, I hope he does horrible. So we'll see how he does. But if we're projecting off of historical performance for top 4 receivers, he'll get a sub 70 PFF grade. And then at wide receiver, you have Keenan Allen. He had an 86.3 grade for the Chargers. I do think he is a great wide receiver. However, I think he is starting to get old and he's on his downward trajectory. So it's hard to keep that performance up. I think he's getting close to a shelf, if I'm being completely honest. So those are the receiver side. Obviously, on the Vikings territory, we have the best wide receiver in the NFL, period, with Justin Jefferson, who missed almost half the season and still made out with a 91.1 PFF grade. Just phenomenal. And then you have Jordan Addison, who had a 68.6 grade, which is higher than the average, right? In wide receiver 2, he had a 68.6 grade, and I do expect him to take a leap forward. There was talk from Keenan McCardell recently saying that Jordan Addison has made huge leaps in his full first offseason in the NFL. So really exciting about that. And then wide receiver 3 is a bit of a question mark for the Vikings, honestly. And more than likely, that will either be a Blake Powell or it'll be someone in that room. But ultimately, Powell had a 61.7 grade. So not great from a wide receiver 3 standpoint. So you could make an argument that it's pretty close, but I would maybe put the advantage on the Bears, only because they are 3 deep and we are 2 deep. However, I do think Justin Jefferson is hands and feet better than DJ Moore. So if you told me, Gyles, the introduction of Justin Jefferson is far better than just having 3 guys, I could be argued into the Vikings have a better wide receiver position. You can tell me if you disagree, but that's a wide receiver thing. I think it's close, but I think there is advantage Bears. In the tight end room, you have Cole Kmet for the Bears at a 73.6 grade. He's a good tight end. But the exciting part is that we have a better tight end. We have TJ Hawkinson, and I truly believe when healthy, he is a top 3 tight end. And he also battled injury and still had a 78.8 grade. I put this absolutely advantage tight end for the Vikings. And that's not even including Josh Oliver, who is the best blocking tight end that I think is underrated in the pass game. So I think we have a clear position to win in the tight end room, period, full stop. So really, really excited about that. So when it comes to running back, the Bears obviously have DeAndre Swift, who had a little bit of a down year and came out with a 66.5 grade. And the Vikings have the number 1 rated running back in the last part of last season, in Aaron Jones. He had an 80.9 grade. And I'm really hoping he can continue that performance for one more season suited up in purple. So I, once again, give a hard preference to the Minnesota Vikings when it comes to the running back room. So when you're looking at the infrastructure around, that's just looking at, the people around you. When I have to compare coaching staff, it's not even close. The Vikings have a better infrastructure. The Bears have a defensive minded guy, and I think we have a better defense, to be honest, but those are just details. And I think we have a better coach in Kevin O'Connell. So when you look at the infrastructure around both of those quarterbacks, although Caleb Williams is projected to be this generational talent, so was Lawrence from the Jaguars, and he has struggled to make the playoffs, right? And he had never lost a game. So I think it's pretty strong to say that he will instantly come in and be the rookie of the year. If he is, I will eat my words. I will publicly apologize. But I actually think when you look through the data and look at each individual piece of infrastructure around there, if JJ McCarthy plays, he has a significantly better route to becoming rookie of the year. Offensive rookie of the year. I think JJ McCarthy might have it.
Okay. So
challenge.
I will stage a minor challenge.
Do it.
Okay. I don't really take exception to any of the data or opinions that you laid out. I think the one variable here that is significant, that is not in McCarthy's favor, is what you said at the very end. You said if McCarthy plays. right?
Fair enough.
And that's a real part of the analysis, and if you and I were back in the back room of a sports book in Vegas putting the odds out, that's a major, major factor. We don't know if McCarthy will play. And I will say, I don't know where I guess I didn't look at it this way before this discussion, Gyles, but I will look at it this way now and tell you, if all things are being equal, if you told me Williams and McCarthy will start the same number of games, who will have a better season? Because of what you just laid out, I would not hedge at all on Williams. I would say it's going to be McCarthy. He's in a much better situation. And that matches with what we were all saying before the draft, right? What better situation is there for a rookie quarterback to go into than Minnesota? The head coach, Justin Jefferson, playing inside, like the whole thing was there. So in a vacuum, all things being equal, I think McCarthy's got the better chance to be Offensive Rookie of the Year than anyone in this class, especially when you compare him to just the quarterbacks. But it's that caveat. Is he going to play? And I'm not convinced that he's going to play, not because of anything he's not doing, McCarthy's not doing. It's just they've got a very solid, viable veteran in Sam Darnold to play. It's not like, no disrespect to Tyler Badgett with the Bears, but it's not like it's Tyler Badgett here, like trying to hold off JJ McCarthy, man. I mean, this is Sam Darnold, a first-round pick out of USC. I mean, he was a higher pick than McCarthy was, So
not that long ago.
Yeah, not that long ago. And this is not Kevin O'Connell trying to recreate some magic that was never there and like he's on an island on Sam Darnold. Like Kyle Shanahan was like, last year at this time was like, I think we're going to go to the Super Bowl. We better have a good backup quarterback. I'll take Sam Darnold. And like Kyle Shanahan knows what he's doing. So does Kevin O'Connell. And they both have pointed a finger at Sam Darnold and been like, that'd be a good guy for us to have. So I'm not convinced McCarthy's going to play most of the games. If he does, though, Gyles, I'm with you, man. I think he's got a better shot than Caleb Williams. I just don't think he's going to get as much run as Williams is going to get. And then I want to go back to one thing, too. This is a minor detail, but I didn't want to forget it.
Yeah.
I took a look at some of the previous years when, Rookie of the Year races. And when non-quarterbacks win it, it's because the quarterback class was weak. So, like, Jamar Chase won it, and the best quarterback in that year's class was Mac Jones. Okay. Garrett Wilson won it. The best quarterback that year, rookie quarterback that year, was Kenny Pickett. Okay. When it's a weak class of quarterbacks, these wide receivers jump up and win it. And so even if it's like Caleb Williams kind of falls short of expectations, so you might bump up JJ McCarthy. The problem with that is if everyone's kind of muddled together, I think Marvin Harrison Jr.'s got a really good chance to win it.
Absolutely.
So that hurts McCarthy's chances. And then the other thing is when the whole thing is down and there's no like awesome position player like a Marvin Harrison Jr. or a Jamar Chase, quarterbacks who are dual threat have a good chance. That's how Kyler Murray won it. If you look at Kyler Murray's rookie numbers, I mean, they're really not even close to as good as like C.J. Stroud's were last year. Kyler Murray had 3,700 yards passing. C.J. Stroud had 4,100. Kyler Murray had a 20 to 12 ratio. Stroud was 23 to 5. But like Murray in a weak class, Murray was a dual threat guy. And so that is advantage Jaden Daniels. So if everyone is kind of muddled to the pack here and no one's very good, I mean, Jaden Daniels has a chance. I don't think that's going to happen. I think a bunch of these rookies are going to perform well because Roma Dunze has a first-round quarterback thrown to him. Caleb Williams has a first-round receiver to throw to. So those two guys are going to buoy each other. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is a certified stud. I think McCarthy is good. I think Malik Neighbors is pretty good. So if Daniel Jones is anything like he was as a rookie himself, or even better than last year, so I think it's a strong class. And so I laid it out. My top 5 was Caleb Williams, most likely, and he's number 1. Marvin Harrison, number 2. And then I put McCarthy 3A and Odunze 3B. And then I put Bo Nix 5th. And I know you kind of wrote him off. but I think the presence of Sean Payton and Cortland Sutton I like for Bo Nix. So I put him 5th. But I think McCarthy's got a real shot. I don't discount him at all. And if he plays the same amount of games as Caleb Williams, I think McCarthy would win it.
Yep, I definitely agree. And I think another kind of set of information that might factor into whether that happens or not, outside of JJ McCarthy, but on Caleb Williams' side, have you heard what's happening in their training camp?
Hard Knocks, right?
Well, that too. But
okay.
On individual practices, Caleb Williams is struggling immensely with completions. Really? They had a 7-on-7 drill the other day. He did not complete a single pass.
That's no good.
A single pass.
That's
like
no
he
good.
could not complete anything. Like for an entire practice.
7-on-7 is an offensive favored drill.
Correct.
Yeah. There's no pass rush. There's no blitz.
And exactly. And I mean, you're playing catch out there. You can't complete a single pass. There's bigger problems brewing in Chicago.
Yeah, you're right. Gyles, that reminds me, man. In 2009 when Favre was with us, we'd be at practices, and I'm telling you, at that point, I was still fairly young. Like I started in 2005, so I had a few seasons under my belt. So I was still young, but still, if you're with a team for 4 or 5 years, you've been to a lot of practices. Okay. So at that point I'm probably thousands of practice. I don't know, hundreds for sure. If you count all the OTAs, all the off-season practices, all the training camps, I mean, hundreds of practices.
Yep.
Favre getting there was another level of like forget the games, the performances on the field. I'm telling you, practices, it's another level, man. When you get that level, and I'm sure it was like that with Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and Drew Brees and who knows who else, I mean, the ball is boom, boom. It's accurate and on time every time, on time. The ball doesn't hit the ground. The ball, once the practice started, the drills started and the 11-on-11 and the 7-on-7, the ball's not on the ground with Favre. Never. I mean, every catch is made. Every ball is accurate. It's just incredible, man. And so what you just said about Williams sparked that memory, and it's just not a good sign. I mean, and he's just a baby. He's still young, so he's got time to improve, but it's very discouraging when you see the ball on the ground in practice. And so for that to be happening to Caleb Williams, I'm sure that's very discouraging for him. So I don't wish him ill will. So I hope that gets better for him. Yeah. But I mean, your point is a good one. Like, if you're struggling in 7-on-7s, what do you think is going to happen when you get out on the field, right, and play another team? Yeah.
Especially when it comes to the factor of who will win Offensive Rookie of the Year. If you're struggling with that, there's probably not a good likelihood for at least this year. Maybe improve in subsequent years, but for this year, it's going to be a struggle.
Yep, and you know what? To dovetail it back to what we talked about initially on this episode, positive reports on McCarthy coming out of TCO Performance Center, right? I mean, I've seen some throws. Now, granted, the team's not going to show us lowlights of bad throws that McCarthy has made, right? I get that. Yeah. But I'm seeing some things that people are putting out where I'm like, geez, that was a good throw. I saw a throw from McCarthy to Trent Sherfield in the back of the end zone. And I'm like, I watched it again and I'm like, was that sped up? So I watched in the background to see if people in the background were going really fast. They fast forwarded that. No, they didn't. That was a laser from McCarthy into the back of the end zone. So I kind of like what I'm seeing so far.
I completely agree. I know one of the biggest arguments against JJ McCarthy going into this year's draft was that he didn't have a good enough deep ball, his arm wasn't strong enough, which I think has been completely thrown out of the house here. He has an incredible arm. I think I was already excited about his arm, at least in the intermediate areas. He is far better than I would have ever expected. I am very excited about his arm. He has definitely got some zip.
Yeah, me too. And look, I mean, last thing here, and we'll wrap it up. But Kevin O'Connell. So I think Kwesi is very methodical and intentional. So I do think that Drake May was maybe higher on their board, but I don't think they settled for McCarthy. I don't think Kwesi would settle for anyone. I think Kwesi, and I can criticize some things he's done or whatever, but I think he's, as a GM and with his philosophy, I think he is principled and intentional and methodical. So for him to take McCarthy where he took him, I think he was excited about that, and he was on board with it. And then O'Connell, I think like the way he reacted last year to the Jordan Addison situation and the way O'Connell just presents himself, I believe that O'Connell is excited about JJ McCarthy. So
Agreed.
I'm not guaranteeing McCarthy's going to work out. It could not work out. I don't know that. But I believe that there is true confidence and belief in the building about McCarthy, and that says a lot because I trust O'Connell quite a bit. So it's kind of like, again, to use a high-end example to illustrate a point, it's almost like it used to be no one ever wanted to trade with Belichick, right? Because it's like, what do I not know here? So it's like the opposite with that. It's like, I never want to trade with Belichick. It's like, if it's offense and McCarthy wants to do it, I'm in. He's right on TJ Hawkinson. He's right on Jordan Addison. Look what he's done with Justin Jefferson. Like, he's right. He knows what he's doing, and he's on board with McCarthy. Yeah, so I'm on board with McCarthy too, because I mean, what could I possibly know that O'Connell doesn't? So.
I mean, probably a lot. You're the best football 9 I know, but those are just
very
details.
funny. Very funny. What are you drinking over there? All right. Anything else in your notebook, Gyles, before we kind of wrap it up for this episode?
We can end things on a positive note. Another strong standout from OTAs and all the practices thus far. Dallas Turner is the guy. He has been getting commendations from everyone in the building. Even Christian Darrisaw came out and said that guy has a better spin move than Danielle Hunter. I am very excited about the freight train we're about to put on the field.
Yeah. Hey, that reminds me, Gyles, I'm glad you brought that up. Remember how I was looking at the number of skill position players in a first round on average? It was, it was 9.4 since 2019. From 2019 to 2023, 9.4 on average skill position players taken in the first round. Well, this year it was 14, and the number was really high because of what happened in the first half of the first round. Remember all the offensive players that went first? It was like, wasn't it the first 12 were? Boom. Yeah, it was everybody. And we're sitting there at the Star in Dallas being like, holy cow. Well, what happens then is great players on the defensive side got pushed down. I mean, I would love to see some sort of simulation, like in the last 10 years or 20 years. Where would Dallas Turner have gone in the draft? Because I gotta think that him going 17th is the outlier in that. I gotta think he's a top 12 or 10 pick almost every year, except this year he went 17th, and the Vikings were there to capitalize.
Yep, and there was a lot of at least people that I knew that had him in a top 5 even evaluation. Now I think that's maybe a little aggressive, but the point is there's definitely a spectrum of people that were very high on him, and I know in that subsection of audiences, some people are upset about the amount of draft capital we had to give up to get him. But if you were the Vikings at 22 and you gave up that same amount of draft capital to move up to number 5, or let's call it 7 or 10 or whatever it might be to get him where he was supposed to go, everyone would have said that we got the steal, right?
Yes.
It's like... it's all about the player, not the positioning. You know what I mean? Like if you trade that to get a top 5 pick, you absolutely stole the draft, right? So that's still an F. We need to see him play in the regular season, but I'm definitely liking what I'm seeing thus far in OTAs.
Yep, me too. All right. Lots of good news coming from TCO Performance Center. We hope that they keep it up, and when they do, we'll be here to talk about it. That's going to do it for this episode of the Wobcast 2.0. Thank you for listening. On behalf of Gyles, we're going to sign off for now. But before we do, I want to remind everyone to like, follow, and subscribe to Wobcast 2.0. You can do that in a lot of different places, and every time you do, it helps us out. YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, all the places. We're there. We want to meet you there. So come find us, like, subscribe, follow, comment, all of those things, and we'll engage with you. It's one of our favorite parts of doing all of this. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Wobcast 2.0. On behalf of my partner and my co-host Gyles, this is Wobby signing off for now. But until next time, Skol Vikings.